The polished marble floors of Harrington First and Trust glimmered beneath the morning light like a stage waiting for a performer. It was a place where silence equaled power, where deals worth millions were traded with a nod, a handshake, or even a glance. For years, the people who walked these halls knew exactly how things were supposed to go. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something unexpected disrupted the calm. The moment Camille Drake stepped through the towering glass doors of the bank's flagship branch in Midtown Atlanta, the energy in the room shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, but real nonetheless. Her heels struck the floor in slow, confident rhythm, the echoes bouncing off the walls with purpose. She wasn't just another client. She wasn't even just another executive. Camille Drake was a for sale woman who, unknowingly to most in that lobby, held a title that would silence entire rooms and dismantle long-standing assumptions in an instant. She wore a sharply cut forest green trench coat over a slate-colored blouse and neatly tailored black trousers. Her hair, in neat, low curls, framed a face that was calm, observant, and unreadable. In her hand, she held a cream-colored envelope, thick with importance. Inside, a check for $200,000 drawn from an investment account with Windsor & Easton, one of the country's most prestigious private equity firms. But it wasn't the check that made people stare at, it was her presence. The way she walked, the stillness she commanded, the silence that followed her like a shadow. She approached the counter with calm precision. Behind the thick glass panel sat a young teller, Vanessa Reed, who wore a polite smile that faltered the moment her eyes caught the size of the check and the name on the ID. Camille's tone was level and professional. "Good morning. I'd like to deposit this into my business account." Vanessa took the check with a slightly unsure nod. Her eyes scanned the figures and then darted toward Camille's government-issued identification card. "Of course," she replied. "I'll need to get my manager to approve this." Camille simply nodded, her gaze unblinking. Across the lobby, the branch manager, Philip Mercer, had already taken note of the situation. He was a man who took pride in his attention to detail, and the moment he saw the check passed across the counter, a tension crept into his shoulders. He crossed the floor quickly, smoothing his tie as he went. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Philip Mercer, branch manager. May I ask where you received this check?" Camille didn't flinch. "From a client," she replied with practiced calm, her tone free of defensiveness. "It's from a disbursement fund through Windsor & Easton. I'm depositing it into my LLC's account." Mercer's lips pressed into a tight line. "Do you mind if I verify some details before proceeding?" "You don't need my permission," Camille answered evenly. "Go ahead." Vanessa offered a quick, nervous smile and disappeared behind a door. Camille remained standing at the counter, unfazed. She had been here before. Not this bank, not this branch, not this exact moment, but this atmosphere, this subtle undercurrent of doubt. It was something she had grown to recognize almost instinctively. The looks, the hesitations, the probing questions that often had less to do with policy and more to do with perception. Minutes passed, then 10. The lobby had grown quieter, the usual buzz of movement now replaced by murmurs and sidelong glances. Mercer returned with 2 additional employees behind him, none of whom made eye contact with Camille. "We've contacted Windsor & Easton for verification," he said, his voice carefully measured. "And in accordance with our fraud prevention protocols, we've also notified law enforcement." A flicker of amusement passed over Camille's face. "You called the police?" "The FBI," he corrected quickly. "This is just a precaution." "No," she said softly, her voice carrying an unmistakable authority. "This isn't protocol. This is profiling." The words hung in the air, unmistakable and unchallengeable. People around the lobby looked up from their phones. A security guard near the door shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa peeked from behind a corner, clearly distressed by the turn of events. "This check is valid," Camille continued. "So is my ID. What you've done here is base your suspicion on nothing but the fact that I don't fit your idea of who should be holding that amount of money. Mercer began to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The silence was broken by the hiss of the automatic doors opening. Two men in dark suits stepped inside, their eyes sweeping the room with crisp efficiency. They moved straight toward the counter where Camille stood. Deputy Director Drake, one of them said, nodding respectfully. A visible wave of shock spread across the lobby. Vanessa's mouth fell open. Mercer turned pale, his composure draining. The taller of the agents extended his hand. Special Agent Conrad. This is Agent Ramirez. We were informed you were involved in a possible banking discrepancy. Camille returned the handshake. I was depositing a check. Agent Ramirez's eyes narrowed slightly at Mercer. You called in a report about a potential fraudulent deposit? Mercer tried to recover. We just needed verification. There were irregularities. There were assumptions. Camille interjected, her gaze locked on him. And now the assumptions have consequences. Ramirez took the check, examined it, and handed it back to Camille. It's legitimate. So is her identification. He turned to Mercer, expression hardening. You profiled the deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence that followed was deafening. Mercer tried to stammer out a response, but the words came too late, too broken to matter. Camille tucked the check back in her envelope. I'll be withdrawing my business account, she said. Effective immediately. She turned and walked toward the door. No one moved to stop her. No one could. The weight of the moment held them all in place. Outside, she climbed in her car and took a deep breath. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt tired. Tired of repeating the same lesson to people who should have learned it long ago. Her phone buzzed. You good? The message from Agent Conrad read. Always, she replied. That evening, back in her townhouse, Camille listened to a voicemail left by Mercer. MS. Drake, I want to extend our sincere apologies for any inconvenience earlier. It was never our intention to offend. She deleted it halfway through. The next morning, a knock came at her door. Vanessa stood outside, holding an envelope and looking both nervous and determined. I resigned, she said simply. I couldn't work under someone who treats people like that. I'm sorry for my part in it. Camille accepted the envelope but didn't open it. She simply nodded. What will you do next? Vanessa gave a small, uncertain smile. Something better. A week later, the board of directors at Harrington First and Trust received notice. A full asset withdrawal from the business account associated with Drake Solutions, LLC. No press release. No televised scandal. Just a clean exit. But word spread. And so did the lesson. That Friday, Camille stood at a national leadership gala in Washington, D.C., surrounded by the upper echelons of federal law enforcement, civil rights advocates, and legal scholars. When her name was announced, the applause came first in waves, then in thunder. She took the stage, her notes untouched. Her voice was calm, steady. When I walked into that bank, I wasn't asking to be praised, she said. I wasn't asking to be recognized. I was simply asking to be treated like any other professional, to be seen not as a threat, not as a question mark, but as a peer. She paused, but instead I was seen as a problem, a presumption of guilt with no evidence, a familiar script some of us know too well. But let me be clear, when assumption meets truth, only one of them survives. The room was still. No phones, no chatter, just the echo of her words settling into memory. I didn't walk out of that building alone. Behind me stood every person who's ever been questioned for simply existing in a space they've earned. That day, I was not just me, it was all of us. The applause returned, not courteous, not obligatory. Earned. Later, while sipping champagne beneath the city skyline, Agent Conrad leaned over with a grin. You're making waves. Camille turned to him, her expression unchanging. Waves don't ask for permission. Days later, a quiet internal memo made its way through the Bureau, referencing revisions in public engagement procedures and the risks of reputational exposure due to bias in financial institutions. It didn't name names. It didn't have to, but the people who needed to understand did. Because Camille Drake had made it clear, without raising her voice, without making threats, without demanding anything more than what she had already earned. That when you try to question legitimacy with assumption, truth will answer. And it will answer loudly. And truth had the final word. In the days that followed the incident at Harrington First and Trust, subtle ripples turned into quiet waves across the financial industry. At first, the news was shared in whispers, first by tellers, then by regional managers, and finally among compliance directors and executive leadership. No one wanted to admit it publicly, but the lesson had been internalized. An unspoken acknowledgement swept through the upper floors of institutions across the country. Don't let your assumptions speak louder than your professionalism. Meanwhile, Camille remained composed. She did not speak to the press. She issued no public statements. Her silence was not withdrawal. It was strategy. She didn't need to defend herself. The facts had already done so, far more efficiently than a press release ever could. Inside the bureau, her colleagues, many of whom already knew her calm precision and fierce intellect, began to speak of her differently. Not just as a leader, but as a symbol. She wasn't looking for admiration, but respect followed her now, like a second shadow. A few weeks after the incident, Camille received an unexpected invitation to speak at the National Conference on Equity and Finance, hosted at Georgetown University. The keynote slot, typically reserved for financial CEOs or major policy figures, was offered directly to her. She almost declined. Almost. But something in her, perhaps the memory of Mercer's patronizing smile or the way the room had held its breath when the agents addressed her as deputy director, told her that showing up mattered. The auditorium was filled with bankers, regulators, professors, and students. Camille stepped up to the podium, dressed in charcoal gray and deep blue. She didn't smile. She didn't try to soften her message. I'm not here today because I want to be. I am here because I have to be, she began. Because in 2025, it is still possible for a black woman to walk into a bank with a legitimate check and leave with her dignity questioned. The crowd was silent, captivated. This isn't a matter of training or oversight. This is about what happens when people stop seeing individuals and start reacting to stereotypes. When institutions, no matter how well-dressed or well-meaning, gallows bias to become policy. She paused, letting her words settle. I wasn't profiled because of a mistake. I was profiled because someone made a choice. A choice to doubt me based on nothing but their own prejudice wrapped in the language of caution. Soft murmurs swept through the crowd. I lead investigations into some of this country's most serious threats. I've briefed for presidents. I've held the nation's secrets and enforced its laws. But none of that mattered the moment someone saw my skin and decided that I didn't belong. She looked out at the sea of faces. So the next time a woman like me walks into your office, or your bank, or your boardroom, look beyond your reflexes. Because if your first reaction is suspicion, not service, then you're not protecting your institution. You're exposing it. The ovation was thunderous. Afterward, Camille was approached by a dozen executives, some sheepish, some enthusiastic, all seemingly changed. A woman from a West Coast regional bank asked for help revising their onboarding materials. A senior executive from a global investment firm asked for her input on implicit bias training. It wasn't enough to undo what had happened, but it was a beginning. A real one. Back at the bureau, Camille returned to her routine. The internal affairs memo, now public thanks to a leaked excerpt in The Atlantic, triggered a cascade of policy adjustments in government-linked financial liaisons. The incident became part of training modules. The footage captured unknowingly by a civilian in the lobby was reviewed quietly, studied, dissected. Camille never requested disciplinary action. She didn't need to. One quiet afternoon, she received a handwritten letter, an oddity in the digital age. It was from Vanessa. Camille, it read, I've started working with a nonprofit that helps formerly incarcerated women re-enter the workforce. I never thought I'd end up doing something like this, but I guess I needed to see someone like you stand so still and strong in a room that wanted to shrink you. Thank you for not yelling. Thank you for not apologizing. Thank you for just standing. Camille folded the letter and tucked it into the back of her journal. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just sat still, breathing in the weight and the meaning of it all. Months passed. The story became one of many case studies in diversity and bias trainings. Mercer quietly retired early, though the bank's PR team never confirmed the reason. The phrase Drake effect started circulating among equity consultants and HR panels, a term for how one person's quiet resistance could create institutional tremors. Camille never addressed the phrase. She thought it was corny. But what she did do was continue to rise. When the director of the bureau announced his retirement later that year, the shortlist for successors leaked to the press. Camille's name was on it, not because of what happened in a bank lobby, but because of the work, the discipline, the results that had always spoken for themselves. At home, she kept the check in a safe, not cashed, not torn, but framed. Not because she needed the money, because it was a symbol, a reminder that some people see value in paper and others see it in people. And she knew, beyond doubt, which one would endure.